Welcome to the weekly podcast of First United Methodist Church in Costa Mesa, California. Founded in 1912, the church gathers on Sundays at 10 a.m., and we invite you to join us anytime. For more information, visit our website, costamesafirst.umc.com, or connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter.
It's more than just a condiment or a conduit for sodium. It's a method of flavoring what is already in place. It brings out the richness and the abundance of what's already there. As you can tell, salt is starting to sound more like salvation and less like something on your dinner table. But I don't want to abandon that image of a table just yet. I want you to close your eyes in comfortable mode and picture your grandmother's dining room table. If you don't have particularly good memories of that place in your history, then I hope you can get a picture of your mom or your siblings' table where you share a meal with those closest to you. What's one word that comes to mind about that table? Was it grace? Was it love? You can open your eyes and I don't have to go to sleep. For me, it was abundance. The idea that God, in God's love, has given us so many members of my family to love on me and to care for me and to shower me with blessings of abundance. For me, that one word, that one phrase is abundance. That word found in the fullness of Scripture and in the fullness of family shows that we are not alone in our quest to answer the deep questions of our existence. We are richly blessed with an abundant and life-giving God. I think what's so appealing for us about saltiness, about the richness of flavor, about being gathered around people and eating those Lay's potato chips is because you find Jesus in those moments. I found Jesus with my adopted grandmother. I found Jesus there. So whether it's sharing the meal of Lay's potato chips or the Eucharist itself, we meet our risen Lord in the elements. For I was raised, and I hope you were too, in the rich tradition of the real presence of God being present in the communion of which we partake. Or as Flannery O'Connor says, if that's a symbol, then to hell with it. She, like so many of us, believed that something actually happens, that deep down in the elemental state, when we invoke God's presence and God's Spirit upon simple gifts, something happens. And I would take it a step further and say that those simple gifts don't have to be up there. They can be chips and salsa or potato chips or whatever it might be. God, like my wife's grandmother, grafts us into salvation's script for the sake of a better and more fruitful tomorrow. But that reality is precisely why I love communion so much. It isn't capitalism. Even if we couldn't produce a more fruitful tomorrow, even if we couldn't get up here, God comes to us in God's love and offers us the bread and the wine. Now, I have this church, I was at Broad Street United Methodist Church where I grew up, and there was this amazing experience of watching, as someone who couldn't get down to the communion table, my dad taking the communion elements to that person, and the person beside him bringing the bread and the wine, and then offering the communion to the people who couldn't get there. And you see this happen in churches, but I wish we would take it for what it is, and it's holy. It's a moment where God comes down and bends down and meets us where we are. It's the fruition of God's grace in our lives. And that's one of the holiest moments that the church can be, is something that we can't be. It meets us where we are. Church at its best does that. Now, you like me probably have had horrific experiences in churches where you felt the refrigerator of doubt. But I'm starting to think that God might be there too. And we can't give up on those communities, on those places, on those broken spots in our lives and in the life of our church. You know, so many people of my generation, it's great to see some people that are my age here. At my home church, that's not the case. My wife and I are the young couple there. But I think about it this way. Perhaps God has gifted me with 100 different grandmothers and 100 different grandfathers. And maybe that's the case for you here too. You have people of all kinds of generations, all kinds of socioeconomic statuses, different races, different cultures. Perhaps God is weaving together a tapestry as beautiful as the night sky. Perhaps that's the point of coming to church. Perhaps that's the point of being here today, is finding those common experiences that bring us together and say, you too? I thought I was alone in this. I thought I was alone in this. Now, not to single anybody out, but I have trouble serving the wine up there, because I have tremors. And Bob came up to me and he said, you too. It was a reminder for me that I'm not alone. And most people think I'm just nervous or anxious, which I am, but that doesn't mean that this is what that means. But Bob knew what it was. The second he saw it, he recognized it. And so I think that that's an act of God coming to us and meeting us where we are. So yes, the Lay's potato chips and the salt that's on them may be for flavor, but it's also a sign and seal of abundance. And here's one more thing that salt is. In the time of Jesus, it was used for preservation. God, in her goodness, shows us what saltiness is all about. Just as Abram left the country he had always known, just as Jacob wrestled for a blessing, just as Joseph took what was intended for harm and intended it for good, just as Rahab risked everything to help strangers, just as Mordecai took a deep breath and said, perhaps for such a time as this, Esther, and perhaps just as the prophets showed us a way out of Israel and back to Israel, just as Jesus did not withhold himself for us, God is all about preserving the covenant that was made with God's children. So ultimately, this passage, this text, all of it, it's complicated. We know it's about relational living. We experience the communion of God in the bonds of the Trinity, and we take those bonds to the limit, but they do not break. We experience the communion of God in the hope of a better world as the saints draw together at this table. You see, this table over which we give thanks here in just a second is something the church has been working at for some time. And in so doing, in our work and our understanding, we have found that we serve a big, big God. A God who is not overwhelmed by rushing waters or the fire that consumes. That God is worth following. The final point I want to make is that it is incumbent upon us that if God really did get up from the grave, if Jesus really did walk out of that tomb, then we have to share that salty news with the world. There once was a saint when the enemy besieged his city, he was told to bring the treasures of the church to the city square. So the saint gathered up all the brokenhearted, the poor, and the outcast, and took them to the city square and looked the military commander in the eye and said, "This is the church's treasure." So if you're here today not feeling like you're at home because of your situation with your mother, or your situation with your children, or whatever it might be, you're the church's treasure. We need you. If for whatever reason you can't have children, or don't have children, or won't have children, we need you. You are the church's treasure. If for some reason you're brokenhearted because your mother didn't love you or didn't love you enough, if for some reason you never knew the presence of a mother, you are the church's treasure. You see, we need to get back to our belovedness. The idea that we are beloved by this community and by God, God's self. The God made known in Jesus Christ is all about teaching and reteaching the fact that we are loved. And if we are wise, we would do so in return. The church, at its best, is God's gathered people bringing us together as treasure. And when we open up those treasure chests, we see a bunch of salt and love mixed together. Saltiness to preserve us, to hold us to fruition of God's promise for us, that one day we will commune again with my grandmother, with your mother, with your father, whoever it might be. We put our money where our mouth is, and we say that we believe in the resurrection of the body and the life of the world to come. We say that though my wife's grandmother is gone from this world, we have the sure and certain hope that we will be sharing salty potato chips again in glory. But Howard Thurman said it best. Don't be so heavenly minded that you do no earthly good. If all we do is focus on those realities of the future promise, we forget to do the work down here. And it was Bernice's father, who Sarah mentioned, who said, it's all right to talk about long white robes over yonder and all of its symbolism, but ultimately, some people need some shirts and shoes and dresses to wear down here. It's all right to talk about the New Jerusalem, but one day God's prophet must talk about the new New York, the new Atlanta, the new Memphis, Tennessee, and dare I add on to Dr. King's words and say the new Costa Mesa, the new First United Methodist. I don't have to do the work for you. The work is already there. You just have to decide if you're up for the task, if you're willing to be met by God or to meet God at this table. And if you can do that, you're starting to realize that salt is worth its weight in gold. It's a beautiful thing to be salty. Therein lies our hope. Thanks be to God. Amen.